GM, FOMOverse Radio. This is Austin Hamilton, your show host. Today we have a special guest, Moose, FOMO number 920, all the way from Conifer, Colorado. Shout out. What's up, Moose?
Oh, it's good to be here, Austin. Thanks for having me over here and inviting me to have this conversation. But yeah, I'm in Colorado. Real life, my name's Tyler, so don't mind really doxing myself. I've been in tax since 2009, working at a CPA firm, and then in crypto since 2017. So it's kind of like my short background. Licensure-wise, I've been doing tax for quite a while. I got my most prestigious license in 2014. It's a United States tax court practitioner license. It lets me practice in front of the tax court in all 50 states. It's a multi-state bar exam. Very difficult, a little brush my shoulder off, but less than 1,000 people have ever passed it. And I was probably the youngest one to ever pass it at time of it. I don't know that last part for sure, but I'm pretty confident I was the youngest person to ever pass that exam. So it's been pretty cool. I'm a big tax nerd, and I'm a big crypto nerd. So ironically, I got in FOMOverse and everyone's talking about building, Pac's talking about like, we should build on this idea of Web3, not necessarily using that exact word, but we should build as a community together. And I sat back and thought to myself, I love crypto and I'm really invested in tax with how my career's transformed. And I thought, well, what am I doing? I need to build in this too. So this whole tax metaverse thing's just a product of passion. I don't really know what it's going to transform into or what it might even look like. My goal is just to help people reduce, friction between blockchain technology and tax compliance. So that's why I'm here, just pure love and hopefully that we can all kind of push this space a little forward. So if I can help mitigate some of those barriers with my experience, then I've done kind of my goal. So that's what I'm here for. And just here to have a talk about tax today. It can be a dry subject, but hopefully there's some like unique. Crypto keeps it interesting, right? There's a whole part of crypto that we don't have regulations or tax law that's quite applicable for us. So we're taking legacy tax and trying to apply it to this new technology, and in doing so, we have incongruencies. We have parts of the law that are probably not filled out properly, so we have to make some gaps in how we do that. So it's kind of at least interesting from that side of things. But if you want, I can just jump right into some tax law and kind of go over overview of how crypto taxes work. Then we can get into specific examples. What do you think, Austin?
Well, first of all, thanks for coming on again. Love the intro there. And so the tax exam that you did, you said you were, possibly the youngest to ever pass it. How long did that take for you to study for all that kind of stuff? I mean, did you just sit at home and just study, or, did you go to college for it, or what'd you have to do to pass that exam?
Yeah, it was immense studying. It took me a couple of years of just locking myself in a room, pretty much. I mean, it got to the point where I'm from Colorado, so I'm a big Broncos fan. I do have season tickets to the Broncos, but even like the year I was trying to pass the exam, I'm sitting at a tailgate, no beer, drinking water with flashcards, so like just flashing through the tax law. So even when I was doing anything social, which was rare, it was just 100% focused. So I pretty much shut my life down solid for 2 years. Prior to that, I have a background in debate. I was scholarshiped at Denver University, and I was doing debate collegiately for a long period, for like 5 years. And with that said, every one of my peer groups went into law. So one way or another, they're all lawyers. So that did give me a really strong advantage. I went into tax, but while I was getting ready for this multi-state bar exam, I have a huge peer group of lawyers that I was able to, draw knowledge on. So they were coming with me and trying to help me with anything from federal rules of evidence, or just how the court works on bridging some of my gaps on the law side of things. So I kind of was spoiled in that fact that I got all those guys. I just had to buy some six packs, but other than that, it was just a lot of help from a bunch of lawyers. So yeah, I took the exam after 2 years of tax prep. You can only take it in Washington D.C., so you have to fly out. You have to sit in the actual tax court, and you're doing everything by hand. It's very old school, and it's a combination. So you're doing all the tax law analysis at the same time. You're doing all of the legal parts of law. So how lawyers bring up objections or things like that in the court, or how we apply federal rules of evidence in the court to tax law itself. So it's kind of trying to take two parts of an exam at once, your tax and your law. So it's difficult. On average, probably about 30 people pass every 2 years. So it's a real stickler, but for me, redoing it, I mean, I know people still to this day, and I'm really rooting for them that we just had a cycle finish in November. I kind of help with some exam prep studies with them, and they've done it for 10 years now. So they're on their fifth attempt. And that part of it is just grueling, because you only get an opportunity once every 2 years to even try. So I was really, really excited once I passed it. I was jumping up and down. So that was kind of that whole process, but it was a pain.
That's huge, man. Do you have a lot of repeat clients? I mean, how are you getting your audience? How are you getting your clients?
Yeah, so I work at a legacy tax firm, and we actually really don't even take on hardly any new clients anymore. It's we are just a boutique CPA and tax firm. I'm not a CPA myself, so I'm a United States tax court practitioner. I handle more of our audits, penalty abatement, income tax, legal analysis, things like that. A lot of research, and yeah, that's kind of why this tax metaverse is interesting. Is I really haven't even taken on more than a dozen clients in a couple of years. So our client attrition's near zero. Everyone I've worked with for almost a decade now, which is really lovely. But at the same time, this whole tax metaverse thing's kind of reignited a passion, because I do see the same thing. I've seen the same corporations, seen the same individuals, which is cool, seeing kids grow up, their families grow up, help tax plan for them. But this has felt like I was starting my practice over again, which is odd, because I'm I haven't taken on a new engagement in so long. It's kind of makes me feel youthful. So I'm really enjoying this process.
That's so awesome, man. Kudos to you on. Sounds like you passed the tax exam the first time, and you got a good gig working for you, man. So keep doing what you're doing. And
Yeah.
couple of the things, I kind of scratch my head on, and I think others kind of, might think the same thing as. So, when you're, and excuse me if I don't, say the proper terms or anything, but so let's say if I wanted to buy, let's just say I wanted to buy a merge on OpenSea, right? So I transfer some Ethereum from my Coinbase to MetaMask, and then I buy a merge. So kind of run us down the tax thing on something like that, because if, from my understanding, you're essentially selling the Ethereum to buy this NFT. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So I mean, that's probably one of the more arduous parts of this whole tax compliance, is the fact that every time we move from one crypto coin, or and NFTs are just another form of token, but when we move from one asset to another asset, every single one of those is a taxable transaction. So in your situation, you bought Ethereum or ETH from Coinbase, so that's your initial cost basis, is the fiat you purchased it with. So let's say it's $1,000. So you bought that on Coinbase for $1,000, and then you transferred it to your MetaMask, and then you went and bought merge on OpenSea. Well, let's say that ETH is now worth $1,200 for this example.
Okay.
Well, your original cost basis was 1,000. We're now buying merge for 1,200. Well, we have a $200 taxable gain when we buy that merge, because we went from ETH to this new token. So that's considered a sell of one property, your ETH, and buying a new property, your merge. And then the cost basis in the merge is now 1,200. So that's kind of like in a poker game, that's your skin in the pot. So now, as you hold merge, if you dispose of that asset down the road, we'll either have gain or loss based off of the 1,200. So it kind of increases your cost basis. We had a little taxable gain. It does create so that's the very basics. We have all these
Sure.
in and out transactions and things like that, and it creates interesting, it creates really interesting scenarios. So like just recently, we saw ETH dip quite a bit, and what happens is when we're looking at these, like we have to think of what our goal is to make this efficient. What I mean by that is, let's say ETH goes from, let's say we buy a merge for half an ETH. Okay, we buy a merge for half an ETH, and at the time of us buying that merge, ETH is worth, let's say, $3,000. Okay, now we have this half of ETH we purchased in a fiat value, it was 3,000. And let's say in a month we sell that same asset for 1 ETH, but ETH's price, so it's ETH's actual fiat value dropped to 2,000. What we'll have there is we'll have a unique scenario where we'll have 100% ETH gain, roughly speaking. So we went from half an ETH to a full ETH, but we'll only have about 50% fiat gain based off of how the math works out. So it's a situation where kind of timing stuff in tax world is interesting because we have to measure everything in fiat. So even though we might have huge ETH gains, if ETH is declining while we're gaining in ETH, we'll actually have greater ETH gains than we will have fiat gains, and thus we'll have less taxable exposure. But the inverse also becomes true. So if ETH is rising really fast in the fiat terms, but we're not gaining ETH in actual NFT trading terms, we're going to recognize more taxable exposure than our ETH gains. So we could have 50% ETH gains and 100% fiat gains just due to the fact that the ETH price is rising so fast. So it's interesting in tax because of this silly arbitrage we keep doing. We have to go from our token to fiat back to the new token, even though we went from token to token. So that little fiat step in between everything creates really unique tax planning for nerds, but it sure is not easy. The government doesn't make this easy at all. So
Well, thank you for that little explanation there. As far as like the ETH to the fiat terms and stuff like that. Kind of just like a little basic thing. It sounds like so. Not. Hold on one second, please. Sorry, excuse me. My 5-year-old is here today, so for watching her. So question like, like on Nifty Gateway. Let's say if I'm going to throw some examples to you if you don't mind, but let's say if on Nifty Gateway it's just all like USD and I bought a fusion from POC, the Trevor Jones fusion collab. Let's say I bought a fusion for $2,500 USD. Okay. I hold that for a year and then I decided I wanted to sell that for 5,000 USD. How would something like that work? Is that kind of like a capital gains thing? Is that based off of your income? I mean, what?
Well, sure. Yeah, no, so all of this is going to be capital gains. And
Okay.
really, even when we're doing like ETH to NFT, or if we're on Gateway, Nifty Gateway, and it's just already fiat, we're having to price everything in fiat. But it is all capital gains. So it's a good question in the sense of one of the core basic principles we have to understand when we're dealing with capital gain is short term versus long term. So in your example just now, you said we bought it for 2,500, we're selling it in a year for 5,000. But the year part really makes a big difference. So if we had already 100% gain in there, selling it at 364 days really shoots us in the foot from a tax efficiency standpoint. And the reason is short-term gain is anything that's 1 year or less sold. And in doing so, you get taxed at your ordinary income rates. And I'll talk about that in just a second. If we go for 1 year and 1 day, though, holding that and sell it, we're taxed at long-term capital gains rates. The difference can be pretty large if the gain is pretty large. And the reason is short-term, when we say ordinary income rates, that is all your income that's just coming into your tax return. So let's say you're an employee of somewhere, you have a W-2 coming in, maybe you have some dividend income off some legacy investments, and then we have the short-term gain off of our crypto assets. Well, when we have short-term gain, we pile all of this into your tax return, and we're going to create an effective tax bracket based off of where you land on this curve in the U.S. tax code. So what can happen is if we have a ton of short-term capital gain piled in a tax return, not only is your NFTs taxed at a higher rate because of these higher tax rates that happen at short-term ordinary income rates, but you can also inadvertently rise your tax bracket of your W-2 income and your dividend income. So you start dealing with this aggregate rise as the C rises, where all of your taxes are getting a little bit higher because of that impact from the short-term gains. While long-term doesn't have that treatment. Long-term is a fixed rate. It's as low as 15%. Well, it's as low as 0% really, and I'll talk about that in a second. So we can have 0% rates, we can have 15% rates federally, or we can get around 17% rates for higher income earners on a federal level. While capital gains can get short-term capital gains can get as high as 40%, just depending on income levels. So we go up on this curve. So it can be much more substantial impact on a tax return. So like that's kind of step one when we do just basic income tax planning for crypto assets is if we're close to a year in a holding period, the cost benefit can start becoming significant. So we start talking about, well, maybe we, even if there was a drawdown in equities, maybe our tax exposure is so large that we would rather just risk any drawdown to make it to long-term cap gains. So we're kind of free rolling a risk calculus, because if we cashed out early, we know we're going to take maybe an extra 15% tax, which means if we know we have 15% tax we're taking on this asset, we can take a 15% hit on price too, and free roll any type of exposure to that asset. So especially when you get close to 1 year, it's really important to really pay attention. If you're flipping something within a week, I mean, there's nothing we can do about it, making that more efficient. Your gains are ordinary income and that just piles in. But yeah, that at a very basic level of income tax planning, short-term versus, like we mentioned, all of it's capital gain, but short-term versus long-term is a big different factor in how we deal with that.
And folks, this is why you should have a professional do your taxes, especially if you're, messing with crypto or NFTs. I think it would be a good idea, to get like a professional doing it. I think, and I don't know if you agree with me, Moose, but I think, if you're trying to file on like TurboTax or something like that, it could be a little bit complicated. If you have like a lot of like volume and stuff that you're trading, like, if you're just like, I don't know, trading like one or two NFTs or not really doing stuff with crypto, I don't really think it's that big of a deal if you try to file it yourself. But, if you have like, I don't know, over 10K or something and, in profit, I think it's probably a good idea to get a professional advisor. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, without question. There's two reasons really. Even this conversation we're having here, it's a surface level conversation, like
Right.
I kind of mentioned on the onset. There's a lot of ways we can optimize things. So there's two reasons. Like as your exposure gets bigger, there's more reasons to have a tax professional. One is the efficiencies we're talking about. The larger the money, the more tax planning we can do, the more we can save our clients. That's just like bottom line. And the other part is the weird nature of this tax area because of the fact that we're taking these old regulations and applying them to new technology. So, another like kind of weird example to kind of show you what you mean by that tax professional is we're all like, we're this Foamiverse radio. A lot of POC fans probably tuning into this. And with that said, a lot of poet holders are probably turning into this. What happens when we feed a page to a poet? I'm still questioning this. And the reason is it's interesting. If we feed a page to a poet, is that a taxable transaction? And what I mean by that is we've been talking, going from ETH to an NFT. We know that was an exchange of property and we had a capital gain transaction there. Page to poet, I'm not even sure in my own tax practice. I've looked at this question endlessly. And the reason is, the one question we have to ask is, did we leave the property? Okay, so like when we buy a house, and I say I bought a house and I scraped it to the ground and rebuilt on top of that house. I didn't sell that house to do that. I bought the house. That was my cost basis. I scraped it. I demoed the whole house, bought a whole brand new house. I changed it completely, but I still own the exact same property. With IRS rules, we don't really know. Is that project still the same where we're still in the same enough asset? Because if we're not, what can happen there is let's say we bought pages for 0.32 ETH and also had a bonus on top. So we bought a bunch of pages, we got bonus pages on top. We fed all those to our poets when a page was 1 ETH. Like right after the project launched. Well, that was three times gains on all of those pages getting fed, technically creating what we call, if it is a property exchange, what we call phantom tax. Meaning we didn't realize the asset. We still don't have any liquidity for it. But what we did is we could have created a tax obligation unknowingly and still kind of unknowingly. I would personally argue that there's a good chance that that's still in the same property. But this is where a tax professional really kicks in. We can file paperwork with the IRS when we file an income tax return to adequately disclose the position. And what that means is we can say, hey, we aren't sure on these regulations. They're not adequate enough for us, but we are taking reasonable basis. We're grounding our argument in strong tax law. But we want to flag this so that if the IRS strongly disagrees with this, we can mitigate our penalty exposure, which is massive. And if you had a ton of pages and poets, and there's people out there like Max, oh my gosh, I don't think he's fed any, so it doesn't matter. But if you fed 100 pages to different poets, there's a good chance on your tax return, depending on how that position was taken, that you probably need to do additional disclosure statements to prevent future penalty exposure to the IRS. And also, keep yourself out of hot water if an audit happened too. So it's interesting on getting a tax professional because there's no clear guidance on when that's necessary. But if you have a decent amount of capital tied up in NFTs or crypto, you probably almost certainly should be seeking additional advice. Definitely.
Wow, that's very interesting. I think me and a lot of people wonder, a lot about the NFT taxes because, this is the only like first year or two that a lot of people are in on this stuff. So, it just raises a lot of questions and. I sometimes I'll browse through some articles, with regulations and stuff, new people in office coming in saying this should be taxed more, or we should regulate this more. So you kind of you wonder, you're like, how much am I going to get taxed on this, or what if I do this, or what if I just transfer one FT to another wallet. I mean, so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us just some insight and stuff. And like you said, if there's, if you have quite a bit tied up in NFTs, I don't think it's a bad idea to reach out to a tax professional. I mean, you want somebody to make sure you're doing everything right, so that way, you're not having to pay later down the road, or the IRS isn't coming after you. Um, so Moose, so you don't have to like expose anybody or anything like this, but have you ever been in a situation where somebody failed to maybe tell you some things and then later down the road like the IRS came after the guy, or have you ever heard of that or something like that?
Oh yeah, all that kind of stuff's very, very common. Yeah, it happens all the time, and it's unfortunate. I'll tell you a funny story on this subject. Kind of also how I kind of foresee crypto playing out over a longer arc. But I was early in my tax practice. I had my first licensure, which is called an enrolled agent licensure, and I was helping with an audit out of our CPA firm. And I was helping with this audit, and it was a really big audit. We had our whole firm pretty much locked on this audit, so we had a lot of professionals on it. And I was just doing one little task in it. And our firm advised our client not to participate in this, which would eventually be named as a tax shelter. So we told this client, you really shouldn't do this, et cetera, et cetera. We strongly disagree with this. Well, when you deal with tax and you get to like really aggressive positions, other CPA firms might be open to this, even though we weren't. So what happened was there was another CPA firm, very, very large one actually, was the material advisor on this tax shelter, meaning that they were taking all of the advising of it, of how it should be structured. And all we were taking was what they would prepare, and we'd be applying it to his tax return. Well, anyway, this audit was going tremendously poorly. Okay, so it was going really poorly, and it didn't end that great. And then the years go by, and then in 2014, I'm getting ready for this tax court exam. And I'm taking one of these tax prep. I'm in Vegas. I'm in this huge room, probably 80 CPAs, lawyers, EAs, all staring at this slides coming up here, just of various court cases. And the next thing I know, on this huge projector is my client's name versus the IRS commissioner, and they're going over the case that we were representing on an audit level years ago. And when you see that, it's funny because I was like, definitely don't need to study this. I know everything about it. But with that said, what I'm saying is even on the best nailed down position. So this person had a team of lawyers, literally 7 figures worth of legal fees paid, et cetera, et cetera. And this case went down as both a case that other people are starting to study for its historical significance, and B, the gentleman lost very poorly, even though he had a lot of help. And this is kind of what I was mentioning before, is even if you're trying your best, there's pitfalls if you're being really aggressive. So A, I don't really recommend being aggressive with tax code. And B, if you're just completely omitting things, these things get worse. They absolutely do. So we see it all the time in legacy stuff. I have people come and say, hey, I have an international bank. We got to go voluntarily disclose that. There's mechanisms in the tax code. So if you feel like you've done something, like you misreported something, or you don't have something, it's never too late to go fix that. We can amend tax returns depending on the severity. You could do things like I said, voluntary disclosure in certain parts of the code where you can come forth, pay the tax, and mitigate the penalties. And there's lots of ways to do that, but in all circumstances, it's way better to come forth yourself than have the IRS find it, because it just doesn't work out that well. And that's kind of what I meant with this gentleman too. The tax code, full circle to crypto, the tax code's lagging. So what we usually see when we have these kind of gaps, we see it in tax shelters, we see it in really aggressive positions, but it usually takes the IRS 2 to 3 years to kind of get with the game, so to speak. So the interesting part is we're going to be filing 2021 taxes here in 2022. Some of these tax returns will obviously be touched, but there's going to be a huge majority that won't even talk to the IRS until 2024 about their taxes 2023. So there's a part of a lag that we always see in this. And I think right now in crypto, we're seeing it massively. We're just seeing the IRS kind of putting their feet in the water. So it's a good time now, better than ever, to kind of just say, it sucks. Yes, record compliance stinks, but it's a necessary part of life to, deal with this in a good way.
You got to come clean. I was telling somebody, I'm like, look, everything you do is recorded on the blockchain. If you're trading crypto, you're buying NFTs, like, the IRS, everybody's going to know about it. Your brother, your sister, your mother. I mean, everybody's going to know about it. So, I agree with you. It's probably good to just, hey, Mr. Tax Professional, hey, here's what I got going on. And I mean, question to you, Moose, a lot of these tax guys, are they going to be trained about this? I mean, are they probably going to have to ask for some guidance and help? I mean, how is somebody that has like 4 or 5 different crypto wallets and they're, transferring ETH in and out every single day or every single week and buying NFTs, and how do they keep track of all this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, tracking's the biggest problem for both sides, for the consumer side and the IRS side. So kind of on both sides of it, the IRS we know is creating a team internally. They've reached out to contractors and they've been able to summons and been effective at summonsing various exchanges and things like that. So we know from just releases that they're working on their side of things. On an individual side of things, I've even since I've started this tax metaverse project about a month ago, I picked up a handful of clients that wanted to engage me on a more serious level. So one of them was an NFT creator, and this individual sold a bunch of NFTs, and I'm helping try to figure out what our gain losses, what can we write off, things like that. And it is interesting because you get into the wallet and like you said, it is a public blockchain, so I can get in there and I can see everything, which is fascinating because it's like an auditor's dream. And B, I'll say that the tracking programs are wholly inadequate. So later this month, I'm going to be releasing a blog on my Twitter, totally free for anyone that's following. I'm also going to do a spaces on this. I'm still trying to work through it, but the party tracking software is worse than I thought. So I got into it, trying to test different ones, and there's my Twitter right there. Yep. Tax Metaverse, though, is going to be the one that's going to be, there's a little link on my bio, but that's going to be the one kind of releasing that information. But anyway, I've been trying different ones. And with this creator, I used 2 different NFT specific tracking softwares, and the software is pumping out data that's fairly erroneous. I was surprised how poor it is. So we're dealing as a community. There's not great tools. And what I mean by that is everything needs to be reviewed. So what I recommend most people is you have to get caught up on where you're at. And that's going to take, and I'm not going to fluff it for people, tens to hundreds of hours. I mean, it just is. If you have 2,000 transactions coming out in and out of wallets, it's just legwork. It's literally, you can use some of these tracking softwares like Coin Tracker and things like that. And again, I'll release the pros and cons of each, where you can dump them out into an Excel file. But then at the same time, you need to go manually review these things. What I have is I see sometimes ETH coming in from a transfer that some of these are recognizing as income when it's just straight not. It's it's ETH purchased maybe on Coinbase and it's coming in. I see other ETH going out that's not going into cost basis of NFTs, meaning I'm sending NFTs like through OpenSea, or excuse me, sending ETH through OpenSea to pick up an NFT. Then I'm selling that NFT on OpenSea. Well, these softwares aren't picking up the ETH going out, so it's showing zero cost basis. What all this means is it's reporting stuff, oftentimes high. It's like picking up ETH, it's picking up income and not reporting the other side. So some of it's not even scary. It's going to do you a ton of favors to go through this, because it's like recording stuff coming from Coinbase as income on some of these circumstances, and then you're getting double taxed. You're going to your W-2 job, you're earning money, it's already getting taxed. Then you're going to go to Coinbase and buy some ETH, and now it's getting taxed again if you don't pay attention because the coin tracking software is real poor. So we don't have good solutions right now. I wish there was a magic wand, but there's just not. After you get caught up, the best way to do is just kind of track as you go, which is going to be true for anything. You know, when we advise large businesses to deal with accounting, they have to go through accounting solutions too, just like we do. And what I mean by large, I'm not even talking millions. I'm talking if you're making, you know, even $50,000 from crypto, you need a good tracking solution, probably even less. But I'm saying at that point in time, you should think to yourself, that's an average median salary in the United States of America. You don't do it just guns a-blazing. You really need some type of solution. So we'll kind of go. We're all going to have to do it together. And I would say that, you know, a lot of it has to be done manually, unfortunately.
So, I heard somebody at my work, they were like, "Oh yeah, I already looked at my taxes and it's like January 16th." And I'm like, "I didn't even know you could look at it already." Is there excuse me for not knowing all this, but is there like a date where they start doing it and what's like the deadlines usually?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, right now you have stuff like, you know, if you have your stuff prepared, some of my clients already do, you can start preparing taxes. So right now we already have the tax laws out. Most major software, even for like, you know, CPA firms and things, has already released their year-end updates. So anyone can process their taxes once you have your tax forms. Most W-2s, 1099s, things like that are going to come out January 31st. Most of this month. Most brokerage statements, you know, for legacy stock markets will come out between February 15th and March 15th. So it all depends on what you're looking for, you know, and then we have things like K1s and stuff that sometimes get held up all the way into the summertime. So we have a couple big deadlines in tax though, right? So we have April 15th. I think it's April 18th this year due to weekends and holidays, but April, whatever that is, I think it's 18th, but April 15th to 18th, that's your income tax deadline. Now you can file for an extension of taxes. So you can file with the government automatic 6-month extension in the US that gives you till October 15th to actually file your taxes. But the caveat there is it's really an extension to file, not necessarily an extension to pay. So if you owe taxes on April 15th and they're not paid, and you file an extension, you'll begin accruing interest, and you'll also begin accruing a 0.5% penalty per month that adds up. So the first month's half of 1%. The second month is 1%. The third month's 1.5%. The fourth month's 2%. So whenever you file or whenever you pay, those taxes, you'll get hit with that penalty based off of how long it's been, and then you also have an interest rate, which is roughly about 3%. The point is it depends on the deadline is how we approach that. So if we know we need to, like, you know, records aren't in order, say we're a cryptocurrency and we're trying, it's literally taking 100 hours. We're going through 5-6 wallets, you know, the 1,000 transactions. The best approach is to kind of start getting a ballpark. And that's kind of what we'll do with our clients, get a ballpark by April 15th, try to send in tax money. So you're sending in the money you think is owed, and then file an extension to give us another, you know, 6 months to kind of get those records solidified. So that's an option for, you know, getting organization under control and things like that. So those are our two really big individual filing deadlines. If you're a creator, you know, we're seeing a lot of creators in F group. We're seeing a lot of creators, obviously, in the whole crypto space. You might have different deadlines. So, you know, depending on the amount of money, you can look at things like S corporations and things like that. So it gets a little more complex if you're a business side of things. You can also write off a lot of different things if you're a creator versus an investor. So deadlines kind of change from that side of point.
Awesome, man. So thank you for kind of giving us those guidelines there. So let's say, you know, myself, let's say I'm just throwing out numbers. Let's say I owe like 20 grand, right? So April comes around and I'm looking at that, there was my daughter, Addie, there. Um, I'm looking at the April deadline and I owe 20 grand. Well, what happens if I don't have 20 grand? I mean, do I have to, uh, you know, let's say if I had 15 grand, am I, you know, can I send 15 grand and then, you know, file an extension? I mean, or do I take out a loan, or what kind of happens with that? I mean, have you had some people that are like, well, I can't pay it. What do I do?
Yeah, totally. I mean, super common. So there's a couple options. One, you know, if you can't, let's say there's two scenarios here. So let's say you have 15 grand, you owe 20 grand, and you know exactly well your taxes are done. You just don't have the money. So it's not an issue of trying to finish the records. It's not an issue of we're waiting on K1s. Everything is done. The money's just not in the bank. In that situation, we'd send off everything we can to the government. So let's say we pay the 15K, and you can get on an installment agreement for the other 5,000 with the IRS. Now, They will charge you interest, and they'll charge you a one-time fee. I think it's around $150 now. Don't quote me on that. It's less than 200, more than 100, somewhere in that ballpark. But anyway, and they'll charge you interest. The interest rate is very favorable. So historically speaking, it works with the prime, but historically speaking, it's under 5%. Right now, I think it's as low as 3%. So the worst thing to do is go grab a credit card and just start swiping that to cover taxes, because you're dealing with such a higher APR. You would much rather get an installment agreement with the IRS. The other nice part about the IRS installment agreements is they don't hit your credit report, so you're not loading up your income to debt ratio, other things that you're kind of concerned about your credit, and that's kind of a great way to deal with that bridging of the gap. So the worst thing to do in that situation is to not pay anything because you're short. You're going to start picking up so much penalties and interest. The installment agreement also stops penalties from accruing, so you can stop that and you just have the interest side of things. So it's a great mechanism. Now that's like if your taxes are done and you just don't have the money. If you and that'll let you get on the installment agreement. If your taxes can't be done because you're still dealing with records, but you also know you don't have enough money, the best approach is still to send off whatever we can. So we want to send off the $15,000. We can't get on an installment agreement until the taxes are finished. So that's kind of the caveat. So that other 5,000 will get hit with that penalty we were talking about until your taxes are filed, and we can get you on an installment agreement. So in those situations, time becomes more important, because the big thing is if we can't pay our taxes, we want to get on that installment agreement as soon as we can. So the time delay becomes more important. So but yeah, and with the installment agreement, we have a couple levels. Under 25,000, we consider streamlined installment agreement. So under 25,000 of taxes owed, and that side's very easy to get on for the most part. I mean, you can get on, you propose your own terms to the IRS of how much you want to pay per month, and it's not that bad to get on. Between 25 and 50, we hit another level where it takes a little bit more effort with the IRS. And then above 50,000, trying to put on an installment agreement takes a lot of effort with the IRS. You have to go through a ton of showing how much, your net worth. We have all these collection forms we have to show, all these kind of things. So, when possible, we try to also keep it under those levels if we can. But, I've dealt with clients that have had to, just because of how life's work and decisions, they've had to put, $250,000 on an installment agreement. So whatever the size of the problem, the worst is to do quote unquote ostrich, put your head in the sand and ignore it. We'd always rather take proactive action, even if stuff's kind of gone sideways. So,
Wow. See, I didn't even know the installment agreement was a thing. I thought, you had to just pay it all and figure it out yourself. If you got to go take out a loan, or you got to sell your kidney or something and sell it, you don't have an option. So that's pretty interesting. I never knew that. So, I feel like I'm learning something here. So thank you for that. Um, you had mentioned you have a tax metaverse website. Is that coming soon, or is that something you already have up, or?
yeah, it's already up. So I'm just going to go to www.taxmetaverse.com, and you'll get more information about me, my history, and there's also a contact thing. So, on my Twitter account and like these kind of things, this radio show, I'll be doing some spaces. I'll just be giving out free alpha, just trying to help people. I've answered some questions in Discord, just trying to build on this space. But if you need to engage in a much more substantial form, yeah, there it is. Feel free to reach out. Like I said, it's a fun project for me. So I am taking on clients right now. I don't know how long that's going to last. I'm not really doing it for any financial gain, but at one point, if we're going to go through 1,000 ticks on an ether scan, I have no choice but to charge, or I'm not going to be able to eat myself. So feel free to reach out if you're interested. And other than that, like I said, I'm just kind of doing this for my own self too. I find it really fun and interesting.
Well,
And we are, yeah.
again, I
I
was
was
gonna
gonna say,
say
yeah.
thank you so much for just kind of telling some of the base level, stuff and taxes. I'm sure a lot of people in this space can find it interesting and very valuable. Maybe some people this was their first year and they made some good money, and they're just like they don't know who to talk to or anything. So again, I appreciate you coming on the show. What were you about to say?
I was gonna say too, there's a lot of trust in this, right? So, hey, you just see me on this Pomoverse radio, and you're trying to wonder like, how's this guy trustworthy? Besides just taking my word for advice too, on that website, you can also see our legacy firm. So if you ever wanted to look it up, we've been in business for over 20 years. So just so you can see that I'm not totally full of hot air, and you're not handing over, doxing yourself to some crazy person trying to steal your crypto. But anyway, just want to give people a peace of mind of where I'm coming from, and yeah, it's been a real joy, kind of just getting into the space even deeper than I was before.
Awesome, man. Well, I we love to have you on the FOMOverse chat. I know not everybody that's listening to the channel right now has FOMOverse or has access to that Discord, but speaking about FOMO and the Discord and everything, I missed out for like 2 days. I transferred my FOMO to cold storage, and I didn't connect my ledger to the collab land, and I missed out. It did not feel good, man. I'm like so attached to that channel now. I was like, oh my god, I gotta get back on there. So it's AA friend, Offren came on, and he was telling me like, hey, it's okay. You're just signing a message saying that Collabland can view your public address on Ledger. So I was like, okay, whatever. So I went ahead and did that. But have you looked at any cold storage? How do you self custody some of your NFTs?
Yeah, I definitely use cold storage, and I take security really seriously. I get to the point where I even break my seed phrase into half, and none of it's even stored at my house. So I take it pretty darn serious. Like I said, I've been in crypto since 2017. I've personally never been hacked or bugged, but it's something that everyone should do, right? The beauty of crypto is the decentralized nature and the fact that we're custodials of our own value. Now, with that said, like to ignore that part of the proposition, like A, either leaving it all in a custodial service, or B, not taking that very serious on that you are the one that has to control it, kind of feels disingenuous to the space. So I highly recommend everyone be in cold storage for your significant assets. It's personally insane not to. And ideally, I think the best practices is, and everyone's got their own, is if you're in a perfect world, you take your seed phrase, break it into two chunks, twice. So what I mean by that is you take your seed phrase, get it onto two, like, titanium plates or whatever, crypto capsules, store each one in two different safety deposit boxes. So they're in two different banks, and then do that again. So you actually are redundant. The second redundancy is probably a little overkill, but that's how I handle it. And then I also keep nothing on at my house, like I find, if you're a custodial service of your own security, and you're taking this space serious, to leave that stuff just sitting, in a desk is just crazy. So anyway, highly recommend. Glad you got a ledger. I think everyone in the space, it's a must do. I mean, they're like, I don't even know. I think a cheap one's $100, maybe $200 for a high end model. If you got more than like even $2,000 of crypto, it seems like prudent to do that. So
I So I had a Ledger Nano X, right, and I keep all my Bitcoin on there. Like right now, I think I have like $100 on an exchange of Bitcoin, but like all my other stuff, I put it on one ledger, and then recently I bought a combo pack, so it had a Ledger X and a Nano S. It was only like $150, and I was like, shoot, so I'll have one Nano X for Bitcoin, and then I'll have one Nano X for my NFTs, and then I have one Nano S that just sits off to the side. If anything were to happen or anything, I can always just plug in my seed phrases and you know go into one of them and recover stuff. But this year I just wanted to be really safe and secure, and you just always hear about these horror stories about people getting their MetaMask hacked or, losing all their Bored Ape Yacht Clubs, and it's very concerning. You want to make sure if you're in this space, I feel like you need to know about security. I recently learned about revoking access to things on your MetaMask. So I'm taking that very seriously right now.
yeah, no, it's the way to do it. It is the way, and it's just what we should all be doing. And it's fun. You learn more and more. I think even as I've dealt with Fox Discord, I've been in crypto a long time. The group even pushes like I'm looking at smart contracts now, and I'm digging deeper than I have before. And the further you go, the more fun it actually gets. So, but yeah, I'm with you. It's something that you should definitely do. And I think even try to, like, I don't know if you did this, Austin, but recover your wallet.
Yep.
Use your
Oh yeah.
seed phrase to recover a wallet to see how it works. If you haven't done that before, do it. It's kind of, you'll just teach you more things. So,
All doing due diligence there.
yep.
Um, So, couple things. I know you wanted to answer some people's questions in Discord. We might have to break this down into like two parts. If you don't mind, I'd like for you to come back on the show again and at another time, and we could talk more about taxes. But let's go ahead. I know you wanted to answer some stuff in Discord. I know we have a lot of people throw some comments up. So, do you want to answer some stuff out of the Discord first, and then maybe we can wrap it up with the comments and stuff on here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll
Cool.
answer. I have a couple that I know. I'm not. I don't have the Discord open. I copied a couple people who were DMing me or shooting me questions before we got on here. So at least answer those. And I'd love to come back on. I mean, we can go into a lot more in depth stuff like airdrops, how that works, staking,
Oh
yield
yeah.
farming, all that kind of thing. So definitely fun. But yeah, a couple questions. One person said, how do I legally hold the most amount of my earnings, and do I ever try? And do I try to never cash out to fiat and just hold in crypto? So, a couple parts of this. The first part is, how do I legally hold the most amount of my earnings? That, in its core is tax planning. So that's going to have things to do with short term, long term, like we were talking about. And it's also going to have to do with things like tax loss harvesting. I can kind of if you shoot me a DM, I can maybe talk about it a little more with you. But a long story short is we're trying to be the most efficient we can. But at the same time, we can't shield our earnings from being taxed any more than just being efficient. So at one point in time, if we have gains, and we're recognizing them, we're going to have to pay taxes on them. The second part of the question is, do I try to never cash out to fiat and just hold crypto? Unfortunately, and this is probably the most common misconception in tax I deal with in U.S. crypto is it doesn't matter if you never touch fiat, and it doesn't matter if the money doesn't go to your bank. If you own BTC, for example, and switch to ETH, and you never touch fiat, like we were talking about at the beginning of this, you still have a taxable transaction. So not turning it into fiat or not getting into a bank doesn't do anything in crypto. We still have these rules where if you're switching from one to another, we're recognizing gain. A lot of countries operate under this. So I also deal with some international country cap gain. In some countries, it takes a while to trigger cap gain. It's not as complex as America, but just kind of be mindful, even if it's international, oftentimes that's how that works. Um, and the other question, I mean, the other question I had a little while ago is I'm just wondering about when it's a good time to burn a cube because Ash was low or Ash is low. I think Ash is probably the coolest. I could do an hour talk on just how Ash works with cryptocurrency. I think it's probably the coolest tax planning mechanism we have. And as devs, as creators learn this space more, I think they'll become more tax efficient. But Ash, we can do crazy stuff with. So like this person says they want to keep Ash for a long term, and they're trying to get into it with the least amount of tax exposure possible after buying a cube at $500. Well, in that situation, we would want to switch to that. We want to burn that cube when Ash is as low as possible, because what we're going to do is we're going to take our 500 cost basis, and we have to go to taxable gain to fair market value of Ash at time of burning. So it's a kind of a unique situation where we are trying to time the markets to get as low as possible. But it's also interesting. Like I bought another cube. I don't even remember. I think it was like 7 ETH a while back. I think they're like 5 or 6 ETH floor now. If I know I want Ash exposure for a long period of time, I have a value proposition where I can tax loss harvest by switching to Ash because it's such a unique or different asset. I don't have wash sale loss rules, which I know we didn't get into today, but we can. But the point is, I can take that loss and recognize it on my tax return, so I can harvest that loss and then get exposure to the asset I want, and potentially, keep that for a long period of time. So it's really a cool ecosystem. But the real summary here is if you're trying to get Ash exposure from a cube, you'd want to convert when Ash is low as possible to reduce your tax exposure. And then also I had a question of what's the best coin to store, what's the best stable coin to store stuff in. That part I can't ever advise. So I can never advise on like what assets to buy, and I can't advise what coins to hold in. I know like Tether, for example, there's questions on what's collateralized, what's not. I don't know myself. So when I use stable coins, which I do, I probably bounce around between USDC, Tether, but none of them that's just a tax guy. I have no clue on their underlying fundamentals on a very large scale. So
Nice, man. Yeah. I always wondered, what if there would be any taxes or anything around that, taking the cube and then burning it for ash. So I always wondered about that. So that's interesting that you bring that up. A couple questions from the chat here. So I'm gonna direct these to you, because this one's more about you. These questions are more catered to you than me. Um, So the first person, Chris Manawis from our audience, asked if you're more bullish on poets or merge.
Sure. This is obviously personal stuff, so I've there's absolutely no financial advice with it. I have a bunch of poets and merge, but I find poets to be the coolest NFT project I've ever touched. I think it's just fascinating. I think the one of one POC is really neat. I think that the long term play here is really cool. The fact that we know that poets can be burned to ash is cool. And my personal preference, I think pages right now are the best value in POC's ecosystem. I think adding words to poets is very undervalued because people are kind of confused on what the value mechanism will look like, and that uncertainty and quiet time here is kind of causing people to think that maybe pages are under or are kind of worthless. I guess I don't know what people, but my point is that there's such a good price right now. If I was to do anything, which is exactly what I'm doing, I'm adding as many words to poets while pages are so dipped. So that's me.
Nice, man. I agree with you on trying to add words to your poet. I think it's a great idea to, make sure you feed your pages while you can, because there will be a time where you're not able to add those pages anymore, and I just think it's important that you try to do so for the time that we got. So, two more questions here. We'll wrap this thing up. So I always ask people, what is your favorite shitcoin?
Yeah, my favorite shitcoin, hands down, is one called eGold, EGLD. But I've been invested in that project for a very, very long time. So full disclosure, I am a bag holder of it. It's a layer one. They got their own network. They can do 100,000, 200,000 ticks per second, penny transactions. They have their own DeFi platform. They have NFTs coming to us. So anyway, blah blah blah. Point is do your own research. But and they've got an app on your phone you get called Myar. Really good staking. Blah blah blah. I really like their whole team there. So
I've heard I think it's Wolf of Wall Street's Scott Melker. I think he's real big on EGLD, so that's an interesting one. I've looked at it a couple times. What do they call it? What is it?
eGold. So
eGold.
yeah,
Okay.
EGL. Yeah, eGold. The network's called Elron Network, and then their Dex and their apps called Myar. So MAIAR. So they got a couple parts to the ecosystem, and it's just like following POC. Everyone's got to follow what they want, but for me, anywhere in this space, builders is what you're investing in. If you should never be bumping it or investing in pump and dump cash grabs. At least I don't. It's not part of my investment philosophy. So I'm looking for people who are heads down grinding, and I find that team to be a heads down grinder. So
Nice, man. And then last question here. What is your favorite crypto?
kind of same one. Favorite cryptos, Eagle and like token, but my favorite the most fun I've had in this space goes back to poets. I think poets is so cool. Anyway, I'm really in love with my poet. I think that also putting names in it adds such like personal value, more so than I thought. So when I fed my first pages, I was like shocked of like I'm sitting outside, kind of meditating on the situation of like how do I add personal meaning to my poets, like stuff that I kind of care about, but then how do I like kind of find fun external value by naming stuff that like maybe a broader audience finds interesting. Like one of my poets is named Napster, just off of the old pirate platform back in like early 2000s,
Oh
late
yeah.
90s. So kind of touches on like if you were around, you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, I love poets, so that's kind of my bias.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show here, and I'd love to have you back on. Is there anything else that you want to say real quick or anything before we go off?
Just one part. I will be posting it in F group, and it absolutely zero sales pitch because it's just fun. Like I said, I started this trying to build on F myself, but anyone that is from F that does engage my services more deeply, I'm taking 7.5% of any gross bill, and throwing it kind of how we've seen other creators do it into a reserve, and we can all as a community decide what to do with that money. So just kind of throw that out there. You'll probably see me post an F group, but I am kind of doing that myself, and then. Other than that, I think January 20th, I'll be on with the Sibs. So if you guys want to keep following along, feel free to tune into that too.
Awesome, man. Well, I was wondering about that. I know the siblings, they said they're going to have some tax stuff. So thank you so much again for coming on. I appreciate you, and I hope to hear you soon.